Good evening. I'm Spot On Weather meteorologist Matthew Euler, and welcome to the Teleconnections discussion for 22 October 2021. A little bit of a Halloween mode here tonight on the overall title presentation slide, showing some pumpkins there with that inner light coming through the carved markings on the pumpkin itself. So hopefully everybody's in that Halloween spirit this time of year, as we're only 9 days out from Halloween itself. All right, so let's get into the forecast teleconnections discussion this evening. First, I'm going to take a look at the global 500 millibar height anomalies for today, the 22nd of October, 2021. In general, I'm mainly focused on the northern hemisphere. In general, we work our way from west to east, from Siberia eastward all the way across to eastern Canada. I'm going to go ahead and cover the major features. Now, we're looking at a 500 millibar height anomalies chart here. 500 millibars is generally about 18,000 feet above the surface. Anytime you see the greens or the purple, bluish colors, that indicates anomalously lower 18,500 millibar height anomalies. If you see the maroons and the oranges, that indicates above normal height anomalies. And the above normal height anomalies are associated with these upper level ridges in the atmosphere, which tend to be warm and dry, whereas the troughs, the green, purple, and bluish shading features here on this chart, are associated with cooler temperatures and unsettled weather, usually some form of precipitation. All right, so the first thing we're going to talk about is on the far upper left portion of the picture, the chart there on the left, we have a strong upper level ridge that's situated over Siberia. Moving our way from west to east, working our way eastward, there is an upper level trough over Japan and Korea, as well as another trough there in the Bering Sea, just north of the Aleutian Islands of Alaska. As we move eastward, we have upper level ridge over the north central Pacific, anomalously deep upper level trough off the U.S. West Coast, and I will be talking more about that feature as we move through the video, as that's a very intense cyclone for this time of year across the northeast Pacific. Moving east then, we have an upper level ridge over the Intermountain West of the United States, and then anomalous upper level ridge over the Arctic region, over central Canada, north central Canada, working its way upward. The majority of this ridge is poking well into the Arctic area to the north of Hudson Bay. And then we have an upper level low over eastern Canada with a weak trough extending southward from it into the eastern U.S. And then finally, I just want to make one more mention about the Pacific Ocean. We have a very strong Pacific jet stream today, blowing at more than 130 knots across that particular region. All right, so these are the general features across the northern hemisphere of interest right now. All right, so now we'll get into our actual teleconnections discussion, and I do have some interesting tidbits to share with you as we progress throughout tonight's video. Overall, again, as a reminder, the Madden-Julian oscillation, the MJO, generally ranges from phases 1 through 8, with 1 and 2 mainly focused with upward rising air motion and convection. If you're in phases 1 and 2, that convection is generally concentrated just to the east of Madagascar and South Africa into the Indian Ocean. Phases 3, Indian Ocean, phases 4 and 5 over the maritime continent of Australia, and phases 6, 7, and 8. As we get towards 8, we're getting just in the vicinity of 180-degree west longitude at the international dateline. So keep that in mind as we go through the MJO forecast. Looking at the MJO temperature composites on the left, for the months of October, November, and December, blue shading on that chart on the left indicates below normal or cooler temperatures, and then the orange and yellow shading indicates above normal temperatures or warmer temperatures. All right, so let's take a look at the forecast there on the right, starting with the GFS Ensemble model forecast. In general, we're situated with that light green line there. That's what we're really focused in on that graphic on the right for the MJO forecast. In general, we're starting out at the origin, the inner circle of the MJO phase diagram, working our way outward to where we're basically on that border between phases 8 and 1. Minimal still, very low in amplitude, not very far away from that inner smaller circle there, that point of origin of the diagram. So right now we're situated in a null phase MJO with low amplitude phases 8 and 1 right on that border. We look at the GFS operational model on the left. Generally pay attention to the aqua color line, that lighter blue color line. Again, we're starting out in the null phase for the MJO in that small inner circle of the diagram. The forecast out through 4 November, transitioning to a weak phase 1. And then the graphic on the right is the Navy Earth System Prediction Capability, the ESPC MJO phase diagram, showing that green line starting out in that small center point, the small little inner circle, the origin, in a null phase MJO, transitioning outward towards phases 2, 3, and 4. Now, that MJO forecast, the Navy ESPC model, runs out until the 7th of November. So out through 7 November, that model is predicting MJO to rotate into phases 2 and 3 with the convection primarily concentrated over the Indian Ocean, and then working its way eastward towards the maritime continent, towards Australia in phase 4. Looking at the latest La Nina update this week, if you look at the graphic on the left, that shows your sea surface temperature anomalies in degrees Celsius, with the blue shading indicate cooler than normal water, and the orange shading indicating warmer than normal water. And so we're keeping a close eye on the Pacific Ocean sea surface temperature anomalies. In general, right now, if you look at the graphic on the right, shows that blue line, shows the temperature history of those water temperatures in the Nino 3.4 region. And in general, we're sitting at about 0.8 degrees Celsius below normal water temps in the Nino 3.4 region across the equatorial eastern and central Pacific Ocean. And that's slightly down from a week ago. My last video I did was the 15th of October, about 7 days ago, and the values were about 0.7 degrees Celsius below normal. So it's dropped slightly, 1/10 of a degree Celsius. In addition, we have cooler than normal water in the Gulf of Alaska by that blue coloring, as well as warmer than normal water over the central North Pacific and Western Pacific, represented by that orange shading, the lighter orange shading and that darker orange shading. That is indicative of the negative Pacific decadal oscillation with coolest water in the Gulf of Alaska and off the U.S. West Coast when we have a negative PDO, that Pacific decadal oscillation, or the cold phase. So keeping a close eye on the water temperature anomalies. Right. Before I get into the other teleconnections forecast, I wanted to briefly talk about the NOAA 2021-22 winter outlook, which was just released yesterday on the 21st of October. Overall, we have the temperature outlook on the left, and we have the precipitation outlook on the right for the United States for the upcoming winter. And you'll notice that this follows a traditional looking La Nina pattern, where the highest probabilities of temperature anomalies on the left, the above normal temperatures, the highest probabilities of those occurring generally stretches from southeast Texas through parts of Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and up into the Carolinas and Florida. Whereas the coolest, the blue shading, the highest probabilities of cooler than normal temperatures are going to occur from the Dakotas westward into Montana, northern Idaho, Oregon, and Washington State. Now that follows a very traditional La Nina pattern. Similarly, the graphic on the right for the winter precipitation above versus below normal forecast, the green coloring on that graphic on the right indicates above the probability for above normal precipitation, and then the brown shading indicates the probability for below normal precipitation for the upcoming winter. And you'll notice that the driest air runs from Southern California through New Mexico, Arizona, West Texas, all the way through the deep south, the Gulf Coast states, and Florida. And then we have above normal probability precip there across the Great Lakes area and into Ohio Valley, as well as the Pacific Northwest. And again, this takes into account both that temperature outlook on the left and the precipitation outlook on the right, takes into account the La Nina pattern. This is the typical type of La Nina pattern you'd see in a winter season. Now, I do want to mention, though, as a word of caution, there are many other factors that could play into this upcoming winter season, including that low solar activity. A lower solar activity usually equates, per latest research, to an increase in high latitude blocking across the northern oceans, the Pacific and Atlantic. And if we get that increased high latitude blocking in the North Atlantic, for example, that could yield a negative Arctic oscillation and a negative North Atlantic oscillation. Additionally, this winter we have an easterly QBO, which generally tends to favor weakening of the stratospheric polar vortex and stratospheric warming events. So there's a lot of other things out there. When NOAA puts this out, they are really heavily relying on those specific influences, whether it's an El Nino or a La Nina year. And that's definitely evident in this year's outlook. If you want more information, I did a write-up today as part of the weather blog, my latest weather blog on the Spot On Weather Weebly website, which I actually throw these charts up and I do a comparison to these as compared to the 2020 NOAA winter outlook. And you'll notice it's very similar. So take a look at the Spot On Weather website for my weather blog today. I get way more detailed, very detailed into my perspective on this winter outlook, as well as the comparisons between this year's and last year's and what actually happened last year. All right, so now let's go into the actual teleconnections forecasts, starting with the Arctic oscillation. And again, I'll leave this up here on the slide. I'll leave this up here for a minute. The negative Arctic oscillation features are on the left. The positive Arctic oscillation features are on the right. Basically, with a negative Arctic oscillation, the temperatures are usually much colder across the central U.S. to the East Coast. With a positive Arctic oscillation, things are fairly mild from coast to coast as we have a more flattened or highly zonal jet stream with a positive Arctic oscillation. The jet stream much more amplified in a negative Arctic oscillation situation on the left, where we get a major dip in the jet stream with a negative AO, and that's going to allow Arctic air to come down from the high latitudes. So let's take a look at the model's forecast for the Arctic oscillation. Starting off with today, the 22nd of October, 2021, we're currently sitting at a positive AO. Now, this positive AO, per the European deterministic model, is forecast to continue to right around the 29th to the 30th of October and then go negative. We look at the ECMWF EPS Arctic oscillation, 50 perturbed members forecast. This one goes out through 6 November. Look at the green line. You look at that green line, that's the ensemble mean. The white line indicates the control. In general, we're expecting a similar outcome or a similar forecast with the overall positive start, transitioning negative around the 30th of October, and then it's going to transition to right around that zero line, the neutral territory, into the early part of November. The European EPS AO, 50 perturbed members. The ensemble mean represented by the green line. This is a 46-day forecast out to 6 December. Again, I wanted to stress that this model has a positive tendency in the longer range. Overall, the EPS 50 perturbed member forecast is predicting a positive AO, briefly transitioning to a negative phase by around the 1st of November, and then back to neutral conditions. The GFS deterministic AO forecast, also starting off in the positive territory today on 22 October, and it'll continue to remain positive right through the 28th of October, and then dip down a little bit, negative there, around the 30th, the 31st of October, right through 1st of November, before transitioning back towards neutral territory early November. And then the NCEP Jeff's V12AO 30 perturbed members forecast. This one going out to 7 November, 16 days into the future. Looking at that ensemble mean, the green forecast line there, generally showing positive, transitioning to a negative phase AO around the 30th of October, and then back to neutral by the 3rd of November. Moving on to the North Atlantic Oscillation, the NAO forecast. Again, showing you the differences between a positive NAO phase on the left and a negative NAO phase on the right. And generally, look at that solid black line, that solid arrow. That indicates the jet stream axis. And with a positive NAO phase on the left, you typically get more of a west-east, a highly zonal jet stream. So there's not going to be a whole lot of Arctic intrusions with a positive NAO phase. It'll be fairly mild along the southeastern and mid-Atlantic coast. With a negative NAO, on the other hand, look at the dip in the jet stream on the right-hand side, that dark black arrow line, showing colder, and usually you get more stormy as we have a trough situated over the eastern seaboard with a negative NAO phase. And then that transitions to a blocking upper-level ridge into Greenland, followed by another trough on the east side of that huge upper-level ridge into Europe. So, European deterministic NAO forecast showing a positive phase of the NAO, generally right through about the 28th of October, then transitioning slightly negative around the 29th of October, right on through to the 1st of November. The European EPS NAO 50 perturbed members, if you look at the green line, again, that's your ensemble mean, and then that white line indicates the control. And so in general, the European EPS NAO 50 perturbed members out to 6 November is forecasting things to remain positive, transitioning slightly negative around the 30th of October, and then becoming neutral right on through basically around Halloween to the 6th of November. European EPS NAO 50 perturbed members, longer range 46-day forecast, showing a positive NAO transitioning negative. They're the very tail end of October, around Halloween, right on through into early parts of November before transitioning back to neutral territory around the 7th of November. And then the GFS deterministic NAO forecast, also starting off in the positive territory, right on through to about the 29th of October before dipping down negative below that zero line into that negative territory, down to a magnitude of about -1. So slightly negative, and then back up slightly positive in about the 2nd or 3rd of November, and back down negative again after 3 November. And the NCEP Jeff's V12 NAO 30 perturbed members. Pay attention to the green ensemble line there, the ensemble mean, that forecast, the green line. We're starting out positive with the NAO, transitioning to near neutral around 30 October, potentially negative at early November. Moving on to the Pacific North American PNA forecast. Here is a look at the differences between positive PNA on the bottom left graphic and a negative PNA in the bottom right graphic. For a positive PNA, you usually have an upper level ridge over the western U.S. into western Canada with above normal temperatures, and a downstream trough from the Midwest to the East Coast below average temperatures with that. On the other hand, with a negative PNA, we have the opposite pattern, where we get a trough over the western U.S., unsettled conditions, lots of precip, cooler than normal temperatures, and then downstream from that in the western U.S., basically downstream into the southeastern and eastern U.S., much milder and drier with a ridge with a negative PNA. Here's the European deterministic latest PNA forecast, generally showing positive PNA, dipping down to negative around the 25th, the 26th of October. That'd be Monday, Tuesday, early next week, before transitioning fairly strongly positive from the 29th of October right on through the 1st of November. So that would be a big pattern shift possibly if that does verify. The European EPS PNA 50 perturbed members. Look at the ensemble mean by the green line, and then that control forecast in the white line. Both the ensemble mean and the control are fairly in good agreement right on through just about the 31st of October around Halloween. with a transition from a slightly negative around the 25th of October to a positive phase, eventually transitioning back to neutral around the 6th of November. European EPS, PNA, 50 perturbed members, 46-day forecast out through 6 December. Generally showing a slightly negative phase to the PNA around the 25th of October, but look at that jump up. That green line jumps up to above positive level, above that zero line to positive territory by the 30th of October, 31st of October time period, then dipping back down negative, according to this model, generally around 6 November before becoming neutral again between 19 and 22 November. The GFS deterministic PNA forecast out through through 7 November rather. Generally we're looking at a positive PNA transitioning to negative 25, 26, 27 October, then neutral 28, 29 October, right into the 30th of October before becoming positive after 30 October, and then remaining positive into early November, that first week of November. So that also would indicate a pattern change if this verifies. And the NCEP Jeffs V12 PNA 30 perturbed members, generally showing a negative phase to the PNA, and then that will transition to neutral around the 28-29 October time period before becoming slightly positive between the 31st of October and 1 November, remaining slightly positive through 3 November, and then going back to neutral conditions around the 4th of November. Moving on to the Eastern Pacific Oscillation Forecast, EPO, and this is the teleconnection. General phases, negative on the left, positive on the right. With a negative EPO, we generally have an upper level ridge situated over the northeastern Pacific, extending into the Gulf of Alaska with an area of low pressure south of the ridge over just to the east of the Hawaiian Islands. Much colder conditions with Arctic high pressure dominating, moving down from Canada with Arctic air flowing more readily into the U.S. with a negative EPO. With a positive EPO, flip-flop the pattern in the Northeast Pacific, and we have an area of low pressure in the Gulf of Alaska, south of the Aleutian Islands, and high pressure to its south over in the vicinity of the Hawaiian Islands, stretching westward. And so the big difference with the positive EPO, we see more of a zonal west to east jet stream, milder Pacific air infiltrating the United States from the west to the east coast, keeping that coldest air bottled up into the Arctic with that jet stream configuration west to east with a positive EPO. And we have seen, especially in the early parts of October with such warm temperature anomalies in the eastern U.S., we have seen this deep area of low pressure fairly persistent so far in October over the Gulf of Alaska. And right now, there's no exception to that rule with a very deep, monster-like storm over the Northeast Pacific. So, the European deterministic EPO forecast out through 1 November shows a fairly neutral EPO, but then is transitioning to sharply positive. You see that? Sharply positive. And then it dips back down to negative territory around the 30th of October as we head into November. So this model showing a fairly strongly positive EPO, which means, again, that we have that trough or upper level low in the Gulf of Alaska with the high down by the Hawaiian Islands, high pressure in the Hawaiian Islands. But this is predicting a switch in the pattern as we get towards 1 November. European EPS, 50 perturbed members. And this one is generally showing a positive EPO, transitioning neutral around Halloween through early November. European EPO, 50 perturbed members, longer range model out through 6 December, showing a positive EPO, transitioning negative around the 5th of November, and then neutral conditions basically from the 6th of November through the 26th of November. The GFS deterministic EPO forecast showing a positive EPO, generally through the 30th of October, then becoming neutral, briefly neutral around the 1st of November, positive again 2 to 5 November, and then transitioning negative around the 6th and 7th of November. Looking at the NCEP Jeffs V12 EPO 30 perturbed member forecast, They're generally showing a positive EPO through the 5th of November. This one taking a little bit longer to get towards neutral as compared to the other models. So this model, the Jeff's V12, showing neutral conditions around 7 November. All right, so now let's take a look at the stratospheric polar vortex update. This is the GFS model. I had to switch things up this week as there were some glitches in the data. So I went with a different looking graphic this week for the polar vortex, but I will definitely hit the main points. You're looking at the graphic on the left. That's our current today, 22 October 2021 look at the polar vortex. And that polar vortex is represented by that, if you look at the solid white lines, those geopotential heights, generally up at 30 millibars on these graphics. So we're way, way high above the ground, the Earth's surface, and generally the polar vortex is somewhat stretched and it's elongated just to the northeast of Greenland. In general, the yellow shading on these maps, by the way, indicates warming in the stratosphere. The blue shading is cooler air in the stratosphere. All right. So in general, we see more of an elongation of the polar vortex today. And then on the right, we see the forecast out to 3 November 2021. And you notice the positioning of the polar vortex, how it has shifted. That inner circle there with that value of 2272, that's where your polar vortex is. It's stretched out, and it's stretched out really towards Eurasia. All right, so right now we have the stratospheric warming occurring over the Arctic. That's going to result in that elongated stratospheric polar vortex as we head into early November with displacement off the North Pole into Eurasia. That's that graphic on the right. Possibly looking at cooler temps that could eventually work their way into the eastern U.S. By middle November. Let me see if I can show something here in a minute. I guess I'll get back to it here in a minute. All right, so moving on. Before I show you the QBO current QBO quasi-biennial oscillation values, I wanted to go a little bit deeper before I show you what it's at right now to the differences between a positive QBO and a negative QBO. Okay, there's big differences here. All right, with a positive QBO, we generally have that graphic on the left, that purple shading, that dark purple shading, that generally we're looking at 50 millibar geopotential heights, the anomalies of those heights. And so we have strongly anomalous negative geopotential heights associated with a strong polar vortex with the graphic on the left, with a positive QBO. We got a strong purple, look at that circular shape. That's a very strong polar vortex, stronger, low pressure, colder temperatures. If you look at the right-hand graphic, that shows your 500 millibar geopotential height composite anomaly. So now we're coming down in the atmosphere. We started out at 50 millibars on the left. The graphic on the right shows 500 millibar geopotential height anomalies. In general, we have the blue shading on the graphic on the right indicates lower than normal heights. It's typically associated with colder temperatures and usually upper level low pressure. And the orange shading on that graphic on the right indicates temperatures that are warmer at 18,000 feet above the ground or 500 millibars. And so those anomalously higher heights there over the Aleutian Islands and Northeast Pacific, the graphic on the right, associated with warmer temperatures. And the blue shading in Canada up through just south of Greenland and the Northwest Atlantic, that's associated with below normal heights and colder temperatures. Now look at the negative QBO on the other hand. The graphic on the left is showing you, this is 10 millibar geopotential heights up in the stratosphere. And generally you're seeing unusually high heights over the Arctic Ocean, over the Arctic area in general on the left. And that's yielding a weaker polar vortex. The graphic on the right shows the actual surface air temperatures. Blue shading indicating colder than normal temperatures. The green and yellowish shading indicating above normal temperatures. So in this example on the right with a negative QBO, notice how that blue shading is over the eastern U.S. down to the southern U.S., even stretching back west to Texas, and the mildest temperatures are over the west coast of the United States. This is a typical reaction to a weakening polar vortex when you get Arctic air to plunge southward into the eastern U.S. After a weakening polar vortex occurs. So in general, big difference between positive QBO and negative QBO. Just wanted to show you what it looks like. Now, where is it at right now? Right now, you'll notice that we have it in negative territory. It's easterly QBO if it's negative, and it favors colder temperatures in the eastern U.S. and a overall weakening stratospheric polar vortex throughout the winter. So again, right now we're sitting like this. All right. So keep in mind that graphic on the right, by the way, those surface temperature anomalies, that is between December to February. All right. So it's in the heart of the winter months. I should have said that at the beginning, but just wanted to let you know. So if we have a similar easterly QBO or negative QBO, there's a good chance that it could weaken the vortex, polar vortex, and have a cooler than normal temperatures, cooler than normal weather across the northeast down through the eastern U.S., even to parts of the south. So that's something to keep an eye on because that's completely counter-reactive to what La Nina would give us. All right, so now let's take a look at the EPS, European predictions. Let's take a look at the European Ensemble Prediction System. Okay, let's take a look to see what's happening these are height anomalies, again, at 500 millibars, 18,000 feet. Green and blue shadings indicate troughs. The orange shadings indicate ridges. All right, so the graphic on the left, what we have going on right now is we have a lot of troughing around the Aleutian Islands, extending southeastward into the northeastern Pacific, all the way down. That trough extends all the way down off the coast of California, which is just crazy for this time of year to have this kind of intense trough that deep off the west coast of the United States in the month of October. Meanwhile, today, the graphic on the left, we have that maroon shading there in the middle of that diagram that indicates extremely anomalous ridging, upper-level ridging over generally north central Canada. And then we have a upper-level low with a trough extending into the eastern United States today. And there's another upper-level low and a trough feature south of Greenland. Now look at the graphic on the right. Now that forecast on the right is for going into 30 October, just before Halloween. So this is getting into next weekend. The green coloring indicate anomalously low heights at 500 millibars. The orange indicating anomalously higher heights at 500 millibars. So the pattern for next weekend could very well feature cooler than normal temperatures along with some sort of precipitation. Now the models are hinting at possible coastal low pressure development and a windy, rainy, cool scenario. So something to watch closely. And now notice on the graphic on the right how that upper level ridge that was once over north central Canada has shifted to the east, just south of Greenland over northeastern Canada. And when we get that kind of configuration in the upper atmosphere, that's associated with a negative North Atlantic oscillation. So it's going to be really interesting to watch how things unfold over the next 7 days. And I just wanted to show you that a pattern change is possible, tying in with the teleconnections we looked at. All right, so let me now move into my final thoughts for tonight's video for this week's teleconnection discussion. All right, first of all, the MJO is currently in null phase and it's transitioning to weak phases 8-1, right on that border. That potentially transitioning to phases 2, 3, and 4 per the Navy ESPC model. Now, just as a reminder, this time of year, phases 2 and 8 indicate cooler temperatures across the eastern U.S. Phases 1 and 3 indicate milder temperatures across the eastern U.S. Phase 4 near average temps, and then the null phase will indicate minimal impacts. And I wanted to really be clear that this graphic that I use is going to change during the traditional winter months. The phases and what type of temperature departures you expect, that is going to change during the traditional winter months, where phases 8, 1, and 2 are going to favor cooler temperatures across the eastern U.S. The La Nina conditions across the equatorial eastern Pacific, the update for this week, 0.8 degrees Celsius below normal water temperatures in the Nino 3.4 region. La Nina generally favors mild temperatures across the mid-Atlantic for the upcoming winter season, and we saw that with the NOAA outlook that was just officially issued yesterday. The sea surface temperature anomalies, keeping a close eye on that. We have cooler than normal water across the Gulf of Alaska, with warmer than normal water over the central North Pacific Ocean. We have a negative or cold phase PDO with the coolest temperatures along the U.S. West Coast and again into the Gulf of Alaska. And that generally favors milder temperatures across the southeastern U.S. and the mid-Atlantic. The models are indicating a positive trend in the AO to start, transitioning to negative in early November. So what that would mean is that we'd go from milder temperatures in the eastern U.S. over the short term, transitioning to cooler temperatures by early November. And then the models are also indicating a positive trend in the NAO, transitioning to negative phase. And again, similar to the AO, we'd see milder temperatures in the short term across the eastern U.S. And that would transition to cooler temperatures as the NAO becomes negative based on this upper level ridge in that graphic on the right moving towards Greenland. Additionally, the models are indicating a major change in the Pacific North America, the PNA pattern, transitioning from a negative phase to a positive phase. And that would generally yield a transition from a trough in the western U.S. to an upper level ridge and rising heights. And in the east, that would change things from a ridge configuration to more of a trough and cooler temps by early November if that pans out. And the models are also indicating a positive trend in the EPO, transitioning to negative by around the 5th, 6th, 7th of November time period. So initially, when we have a positive trend in the EPO, that equates to milder temperatures across the eastern U.S., more of a zonal jet stream, and that's usually the case. But in this case, if it goes to negative, we would see more of cooler temperatures into early November. And the models continue to indicate that stratospheric warming that's going on and a weakened stratospheric polar vortex becoming elongated, becoming displaced off the North Pole in late October. And this would result in cooler temperatures across the eastern U.S., possibly by middle November time period. But I will use this as a word of caution again, not all events are exactly alike. So, taking into account everything we discussed on this week's teleconnection video, here's my overall assessment. The NOAA official winter forecast, again, it's been released. We took a good look at that. And that is indicating that typical La Nina pattern with warm and dry conditions from the southern U.S. to the mid-Atlantic. Very similar to last year's forecast, if you ask me. Again, look at the latest blog I wrote today on the Spot On Weather Weebly website. Go to blogs at the top there, and you'll see my breakdown. I may show you that here in a minute before I end tonight's video. Forecast verification of this winter's weather based on La Nina, it's really going to be dependent on the strength of the La Nina. If the La Nina remains weaker, then we generally will look at other teleconnections that may easily override. Other teleconnections may override the La Nina if the La Nina is weak. But the stronger the La Nina gets, if it gets stronger, then we can expect more of a La Nina influence on the overall weather pattern. Based on the latest AO, NAO, PNA, and EPO forecast, we're expecting mild temperatures in the short term, transitioning to cooler temperatures from 28 October right on into the first part of November. Now, we do see added mid-level energy diving through the eastern trough, which could yield an upcoming wet, unsettled period for the eastern U.S. The stratospheric polar vortex impacts, we're still sitting here in a remain-to-be-seen state, as the models don't do a really good job at seeing the energy transfer between the troposphere and the stratosphere. So we'll see if that coupling of energy actually occurs as we move into the next 7 to 10 days. And then the QBO, the quasi-biennial oscillation, remains in the easterly or negative phase. This again promotes further weakening of the polar vortex. And then finally, the MJO looks like it's going to yield minimal influence on the overall weather pattern through early November. Even if it does work its way into the phases 2, 3, and 4, the magnitude did not look all that impressive on today's model runs. All right, that wraps things up tonight. Before I go, let me see if I can bring up the website. Let's put the website here. I'm going to go to my Spot on Weather Weebly page. Okay. In general, you want a more detailed discussion on the general NOAA winter outlook, my perspective. Click on the blogs tab there at the top of the website. And then I put this on the website earlier today, my winter outlook perspective, and talk about the possible transition to a cooler weather pattern by early November. It's a very detailed write-up I did about what's going on in the atmosphere right now. Here's the temperature outlooks. I posted those in the blog, the comparisons between 2020 and 2021, this year's. And then I also talk about, for Hampton Road cities, I talk about, during La Niñas we can still get big snow events. And this is an example of some of those snow events in the years they occurred during La Niña winters, by the way. All right, so go ahead and take a look at that. With that, I certainly appreciate everybody joining this video discussion tonight. And I certainly hope you learn new things each week. I certainly enjoy sharing this weather information with each and every one of you, no matter where you're watching from. Again, appreciate everyone's subscription to the Spot on Weather YouTube channel. I'm very grateful for all of you out there. And the best thing about this analysis, and in the website as well, whether it's the analysis or this website, the Spot on Weather website, it's absolutely free to you. It's absolutely free. I offer this all at free service. We really love to share the weather story with you. So, again, hope you enjoyed the video. We'll see how things turn out together as the atmosphere reveals its clues, its teleconnection clues to us. All right, that wraps it up. Take care, everybody. God bless. Hope everybody has great health right now. Continue best wishes for health and everything going on in each and every one of your lives. All right. Thank you so much for watching. Take care and God bless.